The square was alive with the energy of tourists. Cameras flashed, voices blended into an excited hum, and the warm autumn air carried the scent of food from nearby vendors. People wandered between old statues and war memorials, snapping photos, barely reading the plaques that told stories of sacrifice. It was just another stop on the long list of sightseeing attractions for most of them, but not for Sam Callahan. The 70-year-old veteran stood in silence, hands in the pockets of his worn leather jacket, his steel-gray eyes locked on the towering stone monument before him. It was a memorial dedicated to fallen soldiers, names carved deep into the stone, names of men he had fought beside, names of men who had never made it home. Sam wasn't a sentimental man, but he always stopped here when he was in town. It wasn't about grief or nostalgia, it was about respect. Most people didn't even notice him. He preferred it that way, but one person did. Hello, Mr. Pictures here, and before we continue with the story, please subscribe to the channel as it would allow me to continue with these stories. Thank you. Now, back to the story. Jason Miller, self-proclaimed social media star and professional jackass, had been weaving through the square with his phone held high, recording himself for his latest video. Tall, blonde, and wearing designer sneakers that had never seen a scuff. He was everything wrong with the younger generation, wrapped into one smug package. He had been spending the last hour pranking strangers, throwing fake money at street performers, and making a spectacle of himself in front of historical landmarks. Then, he spotted Sam, an old man standing still, his gaze locked on the war memorial, his posture straight despite his age. A perfect target. Jason smirked, adjusting his camera angle, making sure it was recording. He glanced at his friend, a shorter guy holding a second phone. "Bro, check this out," Jason whispered, grinning. "Look at this dude, full-on soldier stance. You think he's still fighting the war in his head?" His friend snickered, but a few people nearby glanced over, uneasy. Jason didn't care. He thrived on reactions. He strutted towards Sam, raising his voice. "Yo, Grandpa, at ease, soldier. You still waiting for orders or what?" Sam didn't move, didn't even blink. Jason turned toward his camera, mock whispering, "Bet he didn't even fight. Just tells war stories at the diner for free coffee." A few tourists chuckled nervously, shifting away. They didn't want to be a part of whatever was about to happen. Jason stepped closer, waving a lazy salute. "Sir, yes sir. Do I have permission to speak freely, Commander?" "Nothing." Sam just stood there, unmoving. Jason's grin faltered slightly. He didn't like being ignored. It made him push harder. He stepped beside Sam, tilting his phone toward his own face. "Hey guys, we got ourselves a real-life action hero here. I bet if I yell incoming, he'll drop to the ground and cover his head." The moment the words left his mouth, the entire atmosphere shifted. A man nearby stopped mid-step. A mother pulled her child a little closer. The faint sound of traffic in the background suddenly felt deafening. Because that wasn't just a joke. That was a line. Jason, still oblivious, turned back to Sam, his grin widening. "Come on, old-timer, what's the matter? Did I trigger your PTSD?" That's when Sam finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head, just enough to lock eyes with Jason. And Jason felt it. The weight of that stare. It was cold, heavy, a gaze that had seen more than Jason could ever imagine. A gaze that had looked at men who never walked away. For the first time, Jason felt something crawl up his spine, but he doubled down, forcing another laugh. "Oh, now he's looking at me. What's wrong, old man? You mad?" Sam didn't answer, didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. But when he finally spoke, his voice cut through the air like a blade. "You ever hear a grown man cry while he's bleeding out?" Jason blinked. "What?" Sam's gaze didn't waver. His voice stayed calm, steady. "You ever hold your best friend in your arms while he's choking on his own blood, begging for his mother?" Jason's smirk vanished. Sam took a step forward, just one, just enough to make Jason instinctively step back. "You ever smell burning flesh, kid?" Sam continued. "Ever seen someone's face after a mortar round tears them apart?" Jason's hands tightened around his phone. His chest felt too tight. The people around them weren't laughing anymore. "'Cause I have," Sam said quietly. "And I promise you, it ain't funny." Jason swallowed. His fingers twitched. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the one in control, the one getting laughs. Instead, the crowd was staring at him, judging him. For the first time, he felt small. And then, just when Jason thought it couldn't get worse, Sam did something that shattered him completely. He turned his back on him. Without another word, without another glance, Sam just walked away. Like Jason wasn't even worth his time. And that hit harder than any punch ever could. Jason stood there, frozen, the weight of the moment crushing down on him in a way he'd never felt before. The camera in his hand was still rolling, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't performing. He wasn't the center of attention in the way he had expected. He was the fool, and everyone around him knew it. The air was thick with something unspoken. People weren't just staring, they were watching him unravel. The laughter he had expected never came. The usual validation from the crowd, the chuckles, the snide smirks from those who enjoyed his pranks. None of it was there. Instead, there was silence. And in that silence, Jason felt something he wasn't used to. Shame. His pulse was erratic, the energy that had fueled his arrogance now working against him, making his hands shake, his stomach churn. His friend, the one holding the second phone, lowered it slightly, suddenly uncomfortable. Even the people who had been amused at first were shifting awkwardly, some of them shaking their heads. Jason forced himself to smirk. He had to save face, had to salvage this somehow. He turned back to his phone, swallowing hard before forcing out a weak laugh. Wow, okay. Somebody's touchy, he muttered, hoping to regain some of his footing. Guess war stories don't come with a sense of humor. But the words rang hollow. No one laughed, not even his friend. Jason turned looking for a way out of this, looking for someone, anyone, to throw him a lifeline. But all he saw were expressions of disappointment, disgust, and in some cases, pity. He hated that. He hated that more than anything. His chest tightened, anger flaring up again. But this time, it wasn't confidence. It was desperation. He had built his entire reputation on being untouchable, on being the guy who laughed at everything, who didn't take anything seriously. But this was serious. His fingers curled into a fist at his side before he even realized it. The humiliation was too much, too raw, too suffocating. His pride screamed at him to fix this. And the only way to fix it? Go after the old man. Jason's legs moved before his brain fully caught up. His feet hit the pavement hard as he pushed through the crowd, shoving past tourists, ignoring the murmurs around him. Sam Callahan had already crossed the square, moving toward a row of benches near the edge of the park, his broad shoulders relaxed, his steps slow and measured. The man walked like he had all the time in the world, like nothing Jason had said had even touched him. And that only made Jason angrier. He stormed after him, his breath heavy, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. "Hey!" Jason barked. "I'm talking to you!" Sam didn't stop, didn't even turn his head. That infuriated Jason. He sped up, stepping in front of Sam, cutting off his path. "What? You don't have anything else to say? You just gonna walk away?" Sam finally stopped. He lifted his gaze, looking Jason over. The same unreadable expression, the same calm. Jason hated it. He shoved a finger into Sam's chest. "You think you're better than me, huh?" Sam let out a slow breath, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I think you should take your hand off me, son." Jason scoffed, but his chest tightened at the way Sam's voice sounded. Not like a threat, like a warning, a real one. Jason hesitated, but his pride kept pushing him forward. He had already lost too much ground. He had to do something. He squared his shoulders, puffing out his chest. "You're just a washed-up old man who wants people to think he's some kind of hero." Sam didn't blink, didn't react. Jason swallowed hard. "You're nothing." A flicker of something passed through Sam's eyes. A moment. Then suddenly Sam moved. Fast. Too fast for a man his age. Before Jason could even process it, Sam had stepped forward, closing the distance between them in less than a second. Jason flinched, his entire body tensing instinctively as Sam leaned in, his presence heavy, suffocating. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper. "You don't know what nothing is." Jason's breath caught in his throat. Sam's eyes were like steel, no rage, no emotion, just cold, hard reality. Jason couldn't move. He couldn't breathe, because for the first time in his life, he knew he was in real danger. Not the kind that comes from fists or threats. The kind that comes from standing in front of a man who has survived things Jason couldn't even begin to imagine. Sam's voice stayed quiet, controlled. You think I need to prove something to you? You think my life, what I've seen, what I've done, needs to be measured by what some kid with a phone thinks? Jason swallowed, his throat dry. Sam let the silence stretch, let the weight of the moment crush Jason where he stood. Then, finally, he leaned back. Walk away, son. Jason's body betrayed him before his brain could catch up. His feet moved. He stumbled back, heart pounding, hands shaking. He wanted to say something, anything, but his mouth wouldn't form the words. His brain wouldn't let him. Because in that moment, he wasn't in control anymore. He never had been. Sam turned without another word, walking away, leaving Jason standing there, frozen, his entire world crumbling beneath him. And the worst part? The cameras were still rolling. Jason stood there, breath heavy, his chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven bursts. His fists were still clenched at his sides, but his body refused to move. His mind screamed at him to do something, anything, to take back control, to claw back some dignity from the wreckage of what had just happened. But it was useless. The moment was already gone. The crowd had seen everything. The phones were still pointed at him. But this time, the lenses weren't capturing a cocky influencer making fools out of unsuspecting strangers. No, this time, he was the fool. And there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. A murmur ran through the tourists still lingering nearby, hushed voices whispering to each other, judgment thick in the air. A few people had already put their phones away, like they had lost interest in him completely. They weren't waiting to see what he did next. They already knew. Jason's throat felt tight. His mouth was dry. He turned to his friend, the one still holding his phone, still recording, but the look on his face was different now. He wasn't grinning. He wasn't hyping him up. He just looked uncomfortable. Jason swallowed, forcing a smirk, trying to pretend like this was still something he could laugh off. Whatever, he muttered, shaking his head. Old dude's got a stick up his ass. Let's just... No, man. His friend cut him off, lowering his phone. His voice was flat, not amused, not even annoyed, just done. Jason blinked. What? His friend shook his head. That was messed up, bro. You took it too far. Jason felt something sharp stab at his gut. Are you serious? His friend exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Dude, he was just standing there. You went after him for no reason. Jason scoffed, but it sounded weak. Come on, it was just a joke. His friend didn't respond. He just gave Jason a long look, then shoved his phone into his pocket. And just like that, the reality started to sink in. He wasn't the leader anymore. He wasn't the guy everyone followed around, the guy they all wanted to be seen with. He was the guy they were embarrassed to be around. Jason felt his face flush, a wave of heat rising up his neck. Oh, so now you're turning on me? His friend sighed, looking away. Nah, man, I'm done with this. Then, without another word, he walked off. Jason stood there, stunned. His friend had never walked away from him before, not once. But now he was alone. A few more people muttered as they passed him, but Jason couldn't even focus on them anymore. His mind was a mess. His chest felt tight, his skin clammy. He felt like the whole world had just shifted beneath his feet, and he had no idea how to find solid ground again. His phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down. It was his live stream chat. Thousands of people watching, commenting, but instead of the usual praise, the laughing emojis, the "you're hilarious" messages, the hype, it was different. Dude, you messed up. That was straight up disrespectful. Unfollowed, bro, not cool. What's wrong with you? His stomach twisted. He scrolled, looking for something, anything, that would reassure him, that would tell him this was just another viral win. But there was nothing, just wave after wave of disappointment, disgust, and people walking away. His heart pounded in his ears. He had spent years building this, his following, his brand, his reputation as the guy who didn't care, the guy who could do or say anything and get away with it. And now it was falling apart in real time because of one man, one old man. Jason clenched his jaw, fingers tightening around his phone. Number. He wasn't going down like this. His feet moved before he could think, carrying him back across the square, back toward the benches where Sam had disappeared. He pushed past lingering tourists, ignoring the stares, ignoring the shame creeping into his gut. He spotted Sam sitting on a bench, his back straight, eyes focused on nothing in particular, like he was lost in thought. The man looked completely unbothered, like Jason didn't even exist. And that was the final straw. "Hello, Mr. Pictures here, and before we continue with the story, please subscribe to the channel as it would allow me to continue with these stories. Thank you." Now, back to the story. Jason stormed up to him, voice sharper than he intended. "Hey!" Sam didn't even blink. Jason exhaled, frustration boiling over. "You think you're better than me?" Slowly, Sam turned his head, his gaze meeting Jason's. There was no anger, no smugness, just that same unreadable calm. Jason's pulse hammered. "You think you're so damn wise, huh? Sitting here, acting like you're some untouchable war hero or whatever?" Sam studied him for a long moment. Then finally he sighed. "Son," he said, voice steady, "what exactly do you think you're trying to prove right now?" Jason's mouth opened, but no words came out, because he didn't know. He had no idea. He had come here ready to fight, ready to win back control, but standing in front of Sam now, all that anger felt empty. Sam watched him, waiting, like he already knew Jason didn't have an answer, and that just made Jason angrier. I just, Jason stammered, then exhaled sharply. "I don't know, man, all right? I don't know." His voice cracked slightly at the end. He felt his own humiliation sink deeper. Sam didn't flinch, didn't gloat. He just nodded like he had been expecting this. Then calmly he gestured to the bench beside him. "Sit." Jason hesitated, but for some reason, he did. His whole body felt tense, like he was waiting for another attack, another lecture, another moment where Sam would look at him and see nothing but a punk kid who didn't know anything. But Sam just sat there, quiet. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Sam exhaled and said, "I used to be you, kid." Jason turned his head, eyes narrowing. "Yeah, right." Sam smirked. Not the live streams, not the cameras, but the anger, the need to prove myself, the feeling that if I wasn't bigger, louder, stronger than everyone else, I didn't matter. Jason swallowed hard. Sam nodded toward the war memorial. "You ever meet a man who thought he was invincible?" Jason blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Sam's face was unreadable again. "I have." Jason exhaled, staring down at his phone. He wasn't live anymore. The screen had gone dark. His entire world felt dark. Sam's voice was quieter now. "There are two kinds of men in this world, kid. The ones who figure out who they are before it's too late, and the ones who don't." Jason clenched his jaw, and for the first time in his life, he listened. The night had settled into a strange stillness around them, the distant hum of traffic blending with the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Jason sat stiffly beside Sam on the bench, his phone resting on his knee, the screen dark, forgotten. The city still moved around them, tourists snapping pictures, locals weaving through the square on their way home. But for Jason, it felt like he and Sam were in a bubble, cut off from the rest of the world. He had never felt like this before. His whole life had been about noise, about attention, about keeping the world watching, keeping the likes rolling in, keeping himself relevant. But right now, sitting beside a man who had seen things Jason would never understand, he had nothing to say. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he was quiet. Sam took a slow breath, staring at the war memorial in front of them. His fingers flexed slightly as if tracing invisible shapes in the air, memories only he could see. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low, steady. "You think you know what power is, kid?" Jason's throat felt tight. "What?" Sam didn't look at him. "You think power is having people watch you, laugh at your jokes, follow you?" He let out a short breath, shaking his head. "That ain't power." Jason frowned, shifting on the bench. "Then what is?" Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then finally he turned to Jason, his gaze sharp, unwavering. "Power is knowing you could destroy someone, and choosing not to." Jason blinked, His mind reeled for a response, something snarky, something dismissive, but nothing came. Because deep down, he knew Sam was right. Sam leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I've known men who had real power, the kind you don't measure in followers or bank accounts, the kind that comes from experience, from surviving things that would break most people. And do you know what those men had in common? Jason swallowed hard, shaking his head. They never had to prove a damn thing to anyone. Jason felt the words settle deep in his chest, like an anchor pulling him down. He had spent his entire life proving things, proving he was fearless, proving he was worth watching, proving that he mattered. And now, sitting next to Sam, he realized how hollow it all was. Sam sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I used to be angry like you, thought the world owed me something, thought if I was loud enough, tough enough, people would respect me. He shook his head. Turns out, all I was doing was screaming into the void. Jason clenched his jaw. He wanted to push back, to say something that made him feel like he was still in control. But control had slipped through his fingers long ago, and he wasn't sure he'd ever had it to begin with. His voice was quieter when he finally spoke. So what changed? Sam exhaled slowly. War. Jason shifted uncomfortably, but Sam wasn't looking for pity. He wasn't even really looking at Jason, just staring into the past. I watch good men die, men who deserve better, and I realized something real fast. Nobody's keeping score. Nobody cares how many people know your name, how many people laugh at your jokes. The only thing that matters in the end is what kind of man you are. Jason bit the inside of his cheek, staring at his hands. His fingers curled, then uncurled, like he was trying to grasp onto something that wasn't there. Sam turned back to him, his voice steady. Right now, kid, you're the kind of man people forget about. Jason flinched. The words cut deep, but there was no malice in them. No hatred, just truth. He let out a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging. So what the hell am I supposed to do? Sam gave him a long look before answering. Figure out who you want to be, and start being him. Jason exhaled, shaking his head. It's not that easy. Sam smirked. Nothing worth doing ever is. Jason leaned back against the bench, staring up at the darkening sky. He felt exhausted, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. It was like his whole identity had been stripped away in the span of a few hours, and now he was left staring at the wreckage, trying to figure out what the hell was left. His phone buzzed again. He glanced down. More notifications, more comments. His followers were still watching, still waiting to see what he would do next. For the first time, he didn't care. He turned off his phone. Sam arched an eyebrow. That's a start. Jason let out a breath, dragging a hand down his face. Yeah. The night stretched on around them, the city moving at its own pace, uncaring of the lesson Jason had just learned. And for the first time, Jason wasn't chasing it. He was just sitting still. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed.